sorry. We're good now.
Okay, good afternoon again. We know that you can hear me. How wonderful to start this meeting with the words of Ella Baker. When I was approximately 18, I organized a Friends of SNCC chapter at the University of Illinois. And very soon after that, the provost told me that I could take my show on the road anytime I wanted to. And so I took his advice and began to work full time for the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC. I say that because today far too many people have no idea what the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee was or what it did, yet it certainly shaped my life. It provided me with an education far beyond anything I could have gained in the academy. The last time I saw Miss Baker, she was older than I am now. I was visiting her in her apartment in New York, and she was explaining to me that the work at that moment was to build a mass party, that our work had not been completed. Certainly today, the work may not be to build a mass party, but having looked at the morning statistics from Gaza, I know clearly what the work is. I know that the situation in Gaza goes beyond the destruction of the environment. It threatens the very planet itself and the existence of everyone on it. It is a political blueprint for not only the settler colonial takeover of Gaza and the Middle East, but also the plans that have been afoot for the last 10 years to recolonize Africa. So there is lots of work to be done. I do not want to take a lot of time to talk because there are two other women on the panel. And certainly, what we could do is instead of the hour that we have, we could easily do a multi volume work on the lives of these two women. I find it very interesting that I did not know either of them when I worked for SNCC. And so it is interesting that some 7,000 years later, we find ourselves in the same room. The commonality that we have is that we have taken Ella Baker's words and lived them. We who believe in freedom cannot rest. I know, and I certainly do not want to imply that it was the international movement that brought an end to apartheid South Africa. But I know that it had a very, very powerful impact on destroying the apartheid state. And not only did we destroy the apartheid state, the challenge to the International Court of Justice to declare a ceasefire from the present state of South Africa is also a testimony to the building of international movements to condemn rogue states, to condemn settler colonialism, and to try and save the planet from the colonizer, be they colonizers in Gaza, colonizers in Africa, or in the Americas. One of the things that the organization I founded some 20 years ago, the Chicago SNCC History Project, is designed to engage young people who are engaged in social justice work today to have the opportunity to interact with movement veterans, to talk about what it is that we need to do today and what that work is today. I very much want to see us take the lessons that we learned in SNCC, take the lessons that we learned in the anti-apartheid struggle, and apply those movements to Gaza, not just for a ceasefire, but for the building of a very different world if we are going to survive the Holocaust of settler colonialism. So I hope that we can engage more in the question and answer period, but at this point, I'd like to introduce Teresa El Amin, who is going to be our next speaker. Her bio is, I believe, in the chat. There it is. And so this is certainly an introduction to who she is. And now I'd like for her to share her story with all of you.
Thank you, Dr. Fanny Rushing. If you could take my bio down so I could see a little bit more. I'd like to say thanks to all the members of the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom who are present. We did reach out to WILF members to ask you to be a part of this Black History Month program. My name is Teresa El Amin, but when I was with SNCC, I was known as Terry Shaw, born in Atlanta in 1948. When I was 10 years old, a fifth grade teacher decided that I was smart enough to skip the sixth grade. So it's important because I was always one of the very younger SNCC students. When I graduated from high school in 1965, and they announced that I had a scholarship to Tuskegee, everybody jumped up and was applauding. And I was like, but Emma has a scholarship to Vassar, that famous women's college that was started during slavery in 1861. And she is going to Vassar. When I arrived at Tuskegee, I understood why everybody was shouting for me, because the Voting Rights Act had passed that August of 1965, and the campus was on fire. Being from Atlanta, voting rights was like understood. I felt so bad in the 12th grade because all of the 18-year-olds were taking the register to vote during school time. And because I was only 16 in the 12th grade, I just sat there and watched them go off to register to vote. That was what was happening in Atlanta. In my high school, Henry McNeil Turner High School was the name of my high school, by the way. And if you know some Black history, you understand the significance of the reparationists and AME Bishop, Black Henry McNeil Turner. Well, the campus was on fire. And I was trying to just keep up, go to class. And then January 3rd, 1966, a Klansman killed Sammy Young. He was in the Navy, but he was a student at Tuskegee. And he was killed by a Klansman for trying to use the white bathroom. But that was SNCC's integration thing that was going on. And so we all just started going to meetings with SNCC after that. We just quituated. And we were going to SNCC meetings at the SNCC house and everywhere. And then one day in the classroom, we had a visitor speaking. And he says, "My name is Stokely Carmichael." And he put down one sheet of paper on everyone's desk. And he said, will someone read that sheet of paper for me? And I'll never forget, a young man in the classroom said, it says I drink wine. And Stokely Carmichael said, is that what it says? And me being so proud of being so smart, I said, no, it says I drinks wine, and that's incorrect English. And Stokely Carmichael used that moment to talk about how some of you are probably the first in your family to ever go to college. Let me tell you about this place where you live in and going to school in Tuskegee. Most of these people here have been denied the right to a basic education. Then he started talking about Lowndes County, and I'll never forget, I was crying in the classroom hearing all these stories about all the poor people out in the rural counties, because I came from Atlanta and I hadn't heard or seen that kind of poverty ever in my life. And then he said, I'm with the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee and I'm for Black Power. Will you join me? And it seemed like all of us raised our hands in the classroom that day. And from then, we were going back and forth to Montgomery, getting trained. And then we went out in Lowndes County, registering people to vote. So I was part of that Lowndes County Freedom Organization movement with CJ and a bunch of folks who have gone on, joined the ancestors, but I was out there. Mukasa Willie Ricks, who was the handler, the campus organizer, and he was recruiting students from all over the South, from Stillman, from everywhere, and bringing them in Tougaloo, everywhere, bringing them into Lowndes. Then after we left Lowndes, after the election was won, we went into Jackson, Mississippi, where we were poll watching for the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party. And those little old white women were taking the Black women in and marking their ballots for them. And so I had to call on the phone to tell them at the SNCC office what was going on. And the white woman told me, girl, if you don't back off and get away, I'm going to have you locked up. And when I called the office and told them what they said, we're coming to get you. And Willie Ricks came to get me, Afia, and he said, we got to get back to Atlanta. We got to get back to Atlanta. And so when we went back to Atlanta, I started working at the SNCC office as a volunteer. And that's when I got to sit with Julian Bond and John Lewis and all those people working at the SNCC office with Faye Bellamy. It was the education of my life. And my mother finally said, if you're going to be running around the street screaming Black Power, you get a job. And I got a job at the phone company and joined the union, and then became active in the union in a way that was still very much like being a part of SNCC. And it was the lessons that I learned from SNCC that made me work for labor rights as well. So working for the union for those 20 years as a rank and file steward, then I got hired to be a union organizer in 1986. And I tell this story in this way because it made me who I am today. Union organizer, SNCC vet. And I'll stop now so we can hear from others. There are plenty of stories to tell, but I agree with Fanny. We can do more in the discussion because we want to hear Afia's story. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you. Thank you. That was volume 1. So now we're going to go on to volume 2 with Afia Ngaza. Her story is also in the chat, but I am sure just from reading it how very much more she's got to share with us.
Good afternoon. It's an honor and a pleasure to be with you all this afternoon. I would, in addition to the information provided in the chat, I would call attention to to being a proud daughter of Garveyites. My parents were activists, my father a minister, my mother a missionary. So there has never been a time in my life when there was not movement activity. In fact, as I say, I was born into the movement. I'm a civil and human rights attorney and historian based in Greenville, South Carolina, the founding director of the Malcolm X Center for Self-Determination and WMXP Community Radio, and a veteran of the Vine City SNCC project, which is the project which drafted the Black Power position paper in the spring of 1966. While the paper was not readily accepted, it ultimately was embraced and popularized by Kwame Ture and Mukasa. Um, in my first year, which was 1965, I served as campus coordinator for the special election for Julian Bond, which is the formation out of which the Atlanta Project emerged. We were, of course, successful in having Julian seated with the Georgia General Assembly, which had refused to seat him because he was the communications secretary for SNCC, and thus in that capacity made the announcement of SNCC's opposition to the U.S. war on Vietnam, notably before Martin Luther King and SCLC. SNCC recognized the imperialist nature of that war and repudiated it, along with calling attention to the relationship between the emerging African nations and the emergent human rights movement in this country, support of Palestinian human rights, resistance to the draft, and to also raise the question of the continuing role of whites in SNCC and in the Black community more broadly. So as many of you may recall, and certainly can Google to see a copy of the paper, will recognize the controversy that arose out of it. It was out of that paper in the spring of 1966, following what I consider the first Black Power conference, which was organized by Marimba Ani, or her in New Orleans, chaired by John Hendrick Clark, Bill Campbell, or Jim Campbell rather, and Keith E. Baird, who over that weekend gave a full presentation on the political and cultural development of African people, beginning with the content and bringing it forward to the United States, and what we must do in order to realize our potential. The out of that conference is when the Atlanta Project, which I describe as a collection of seasoned organizers, students, and malcontents, challenge the national organization on the direction that the organization would be taking going forward, after having had the disappointing experience of the Democrat Party and Atlantic City. Out of that, we attempted to challenge the national office under the leadership of Bill Ware, and Gwen Zahar Simmons to begin to look at that question also. It was great resistance to dealing with that because it wasn't just an ideological position, it was a financial position. And we knew that, in fact, Kwame, in his resistance, pointed out that the funds, all funds, would be cut off from SNCC if SNCC embraced the position that was articulated, is articulated in the Atlanta Project Black Power position paper. The project ultimately was disbanded, despite the fact that the position was adopted and was the organizing slogan from the Meredith March. The term Black Power actually, as best records show, was coined by Richard Wright in the 1920s when he was an active member of the Communist Party. It was a year before, in 1965, when Adam Clayton Powell gave a formal address at Howard University Law School, where he picked up the phrase, and the speech was entitled Black Power, that what we needed in order to change the conditions of our lives was Black Power. He, of course, was talking about using the ballot in a strategic way. He often said, use what you have in your hand, Black people. Use what you have in your hand, which of course meant the ballot. We took all of that, as well as the literature of the day, particularly the book by Franz Fanon, Wretched of the Earth, as a way of beginning to frame where do we go, the answer to the question of where do we go from here. It was once the project was disbanded that the members of the project, went our various ways. Some of us went into the Nation of Islam, others of us returned to school and to various careers that we had engaged. We found that the question of reparations had to be addressed. At that time, there was also the nexus and the debate of as whether or not our focus should be on, continue to be on desegregation and integration into this society, this burning house, that as Martin Luther King later put it, or that we should, as nationalists, were calling for a separate state, viewing ourselves as a nation within a nation. It was out of that I have contributed to the formation of a number of organizations which have focused on the various issues that we deal with, continue to deal with, particularly the well-being of political prisoners, prisoners of war, and exiles at the United Nations. And I'll elaborate according to the questions that we receive. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I hope that you will all agree with me that this hour is nowhere near enough because there is a whole generational history that is to be told. And I hope that one of the things that will come out of today is organizing another discussion so we can go further with this, because it is crucial to our youth to know what we have come through and where we are capable of going. So I think, are we ready for questions and answers?
Well, Fanny, before we start with the questions, I want to address something you said earlier about us not knowing each other back then, because I was in Atlanta when, and I was part of the nitty gritty in Vine City on the election for Julian Bond. And when I saw Julian Bond at an NAACP convention 40 years later. He said, "What was your name back then?" Holding on to my NAACP convention badge. And I said, "Terry Shaw." He said, "Oh, it was a great campaign, the nitty gritty." And I said, "It was a glorious campaign, the nitty gritty." And so I didn't actually meet the FIA until 2000, which was at the bank with Ruby Sales, remember? I think you were staying at Ruby Sales' house in DC, but we didn't meet till 2000. So it was so many tens of thousands of us spread out around, and we were doing our work on our different projects that many of us did not meet. I met Linda Burnham in 2003 and learned that she was in Greenwood, Mississippi with SNCC. So we keep meeting each other along the road because those of us who believe in freedom will not stop.
Rest.
And so that is what I wanted to say to you, Fanny. There are lots of folks who were actually in Lowndes and in Tuskegee and other places that I didn't meet until many years later because we're still on the freedom side. We will always be on the freedom side. And so we will encounter each other as we meet from time to time. And we're trying to last a little bit longer because the two of you are older than me. If you don't mind me telling it, Fanny, didn't you tell me?
Yeah, what? I do. I do. That's between me
and you. And I'm 75. You're 81 and you definitely don't look 81. And Afia is in her late 70s, I think. Isn't that right, Afia?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so somebody may have a question. George, do you see any questions in the chat?
Not yet.
Well, I guess we could keep talking. So, Afia, about the Atlanta project and Julian's stance against the Vietnam War and all of that, and how that whole effort in Atlanta made many of you, Michael Simmons, and a bunch of other people were a bit pariahs in the movement back then. Could you say a little bit more about that? Because I think Alan Haber, who is here with us, he's the founder of SDS, Students for a Democratic Society. So he's got a few more years on all of us. So Alan, would you just wave? So that's Alan, and he's a member of the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom in Ann Arbor, Ypsilanti. So please tell the story about the significance of the Atlanta project and the stance that it took that made it trouble for SNCC.
The Atlanta project forced the organization to deal with issues that had been simmering over an extended period of time. There had been, as some folk may be aware, a question about the role of whites in the organization as early as the 1964 Summer Voting Rights Project, and the whole question of bringing whites down south and what the impact would be in terms of self-determination, a sense of the right of self-determination and the willingness to assert and exercise the right of self-determination, which is all the term Black Power means. After the summer of '64, those concerns grew and became even more intense, and we began to understand and to look at questions of our relationships, the power relationships between Blacks and whites, the power relationships between Northerners and Southerners, class relationships, and the impact that it had on organizing. For instance, in organizing, oftentimes the practice was to have a Black person and a white person to go out to recruit folk to register to vote. And so if the white person asked the Black person, will you come to a mass meeting, or will you meet us tomorrow morning to go to register and vote, the Black person would say yes, and not show up. And then on the other hand, if a Black SNCC person asked, the Black person would be more candid and say, I'm not going down there messing with the white people. So that had to be addressed. And that's one of the issues that is raised in the Atlanta Project position paper, is how we as a people have been socialized, even to this day, to deal with white power in a deferential and hypersensitive kind of way. The expectation that funds, in fact, Harry Belafonte and Julie Belafonte were the lead fundraisers for SNCC at that time, 1966. And when we came out in support of the Palestinians, then all funds were cut off. Theodore Bickel and other Zionists immediately withdrew their support. So it forced us to begin to deal with the question in a what my mother would say, flat-footed kind of way.
Thank you. Someone has a question, I think, Fanny. I see her name, Sharon.
Sharon Terralt. Would you unmute yourself and speak, please?
Hi, how are you? My name's Sharon. I'm calling from New Bedford, Massachusetts. And I'm just very inspired to be here. I kind of am a documentary geek, and I was watching Cost of Inheritance, which made me think about reparations in a whole new way. Kind of a geek about Dr. Gates's documentaries, and just recently watched his series Black America since MLK. So to be here in the same space with people who were there, and it's just really inspiring. And I guess my question is just, what keeps you going? What keeps you inspired?
Well,
thank you.
When I became a union organizer in 1986, in February, I was moved to Cleveland, Ohio. And I kept saying to Karen Nussbaum, who started 9 to 5, the National Association of Working Women, and I had encouraged her to start a union, and she started District 925, the union organizing clerical workers in libraries and universities all around the country. But she lived in Cleveland, and so she brought me to Cleveland to organize the Cleveland Public Library, my first union drive, 1986, wall-to-wall union, from the custodians to the librarians, everybody in the same union. And the union is still there. Well, when I got to Cleveland, it was when I met the socialists. I only knew about the Communist Party being in the South and the Communist Workers' Party because of the shootout in Greensboro in 1979. But when I got to Cleveland, it was the workers' world, it was the Socialist Workers' Party, it was all these parties. And I was like, why aren't you all in the same party? And they were like, oh, well, the Hungarian Revolution and blah, blah, blah. So I began to learn about the white-led left. And it was from that lesson and that experience that I realized the importance of finding reliable white allies. Because I remember what white people said to us as SNCC when we would say, go out and organize those white folks who are killing us, who are in the Klan, bring them in. And they would go, no, 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 that's too hard. Let us just stay here with you. I remember that going on back in the day. But I knew then that maybe the socialists would
Yes,
come
ma'am.
forward and be reliable allies. But
You want to
not
what?
so much, not so much.
Wash dishes?
And I do
Oh.
want to say that after being a union organizer for all those years, encountering socialism, and then moving back south in 1998 and starting the Southern Anti-Racism Network, which is multicultural, multiracial, I guess you could say. And so we did a founding conference at the Highlander Center. And so for 25 years, we're celebrating our 25th anniversary, Sharon. So for 25 years, this is what the work has been. And it comes from my Black power consciousness. How can we end white supremacy as a system of oppression? And that's what keeps me going. Ending capitalism, imperialism, patriarchy, and white supremacy. When we end those systems of oppression, Black women will be free and everybody else will be free too. That's what keeps me going.
I have
Thank
two
you.
questions to read from the chat.
Oh, okay.
Thank you for the question.
Here's one
Okay.
question. How do members here view the Black conservative capitalists who seem to undercut the strategies involved in Black liberation with their "I am not a victim" narrative? It may be a topic too big for this meeting, but I know is one high-powered professor named Thomas Stowell at Hoover Institution. He takes on language issues and every other attempt to gain respect for Black culture. The other question, let me see, hold on. Oh, it's the same
George,
question.
if you could hold off on the other question, and maybe if Fanny want to try to answer that about low-grade Black capitalists and how do we deal with that? You want to take that, Afia, Fanny?
I wanted to, if I may, I wanted to respond to the previous question. I wasn't sure if we were all being asked to answer the same question or it was directed to one person.
Oh, you should answer as you see fit, Fanny.
Oh, okay. Well, one of the things that keeps me going, I look on the screen and I see a wonderful young scholar activist, Robin Spencer, who is carrying on this work in her workplace and working with young people. I see people such as Miriam Kava. I know that this work is not going to die with our generation because there are those out there who are taking up the struggle and going on with it. So that's my response to what's going to happen.
Okay. I'll take the second question and associate myself with the responses to the first. I think that we might get distracted by the labels, conservatives, petty bourgeois, would-be capitalists. The truth of the matter is that there have and there always are those who are subsequent to the powers that be in their own personal interest. And simply because the Thomas Sowells of the world have the PhDs and hold positions at prestigious white institutions does not make them any less collaborators or any less opportunistic than we might think of others who are in more dire circumstances. I think that when we look at what they produce, as folks, as my father would say, a tree is known by the fruit it bears. The contribution that they do not make to the advancement of Black people specifically and humanity generally, beyond giving white supremacy cover, then we have no reason to give them any greater credibility or weight, and to pretend that the arguments that they make are in fact substantive arguments or arguments that merit consideration.
Okay.
Here's another question in the chat. How did SNCC and All People's Revolutionary Party interact? That question is from Sheila Harper.
Well, Sheila, I think you may mean, and help me, Afia, it's all.
She's talking about Kwame's organization.
Yeah. So that's the important point, that Kwame Ture founded the All African People's Revolutionary Party. And to this very day, it still exists. But when Kwame Ture died in 1998, it split 6 different ways. So the folks that I kind of relate to in the party, Bob Brown and others who they have a special identification, Sheila. So they say, if you don't see the GC, it's not the real party. So that is reflective of, I think, the failure for us to unite in the way that Kwame Ture called for. And I have a video of Kwame Ture at the salute to his life, which was in May of 1998, a few months before he passed away. And in that video, everybody was there. John Lewis was there, Imam Jamil El-Amin, Farrakhan, everybody was there. And Kwame Ture pleaded, and he basically apologized to John Lewis for how he treated him back during the SNCC days for being a part of SCLC. But the call for unity is the one thing that has eluded us in all of the Black liberation effort. And Kwame Ture, when he was dying of cancer, he pleaded for us to unite. I showed that video at a meeting of the founding of, and I think you were at that meeting, Afia, the founding of the Black Left Unity Network in Chapel Hill in 2008. And I never seen so many grown men crying in my life when they saw Kwame Ture pleading for unity. And they pledged to do it and do it. And within 10 years, the Black Left Unity Network was gone. So that is a good question about the Revolutionary Party that Kwame created, because he was a Pan-Africanist and he was about uniting Africans around the world. And as he said, I don't call us African Americans, I call us Africans. There's nothing American about us. We just happen to be in this place, but we're Africans. That's what Kwame Ture said, leader of the All African People's Revolutionary Party. thank you for asking that question.
Afia, were you going to respond to that as well?
Yes, I am. And that is that the party, the formation of the party represents a maturation on Kwame's uh, part, and those who joined with him, leaving SNCC or that with which I credit the Atlanta Project position paper, because it was the Atlanta Project Black Power position paper that created the framework that actually launched the next phase of the human rights movement in this country, from civil rights to human rights, as Malcolm had challenged us to do. It was the Atlanta Project Black Power position paper that challenged Kwame and Mukasa and Jamil and others to begin to answer the question of where do we go from here in a substantive kind of way, in a more realistic kind of way. In fact, the position paper that James Foreman issued challenging making the call for reparations at Riverside Church in New York is an outgrowth of the Atlanta Project position paper. There was, because of the hostility that members of the Atlanta Project experienced at the hands of Kwame and others, and our youthfulness, there was little to no real relationship between the project and the party, because we were not able to mediate the differences that and the hard feelings, frankly, that came out of that, despite the fact that actually we wound up traveling very much the same roads, including former members of the Atlanta Project participating in the Declaration of Independence that was issued by the Provisional Government of the Republic of New Africa. So while Kwame wound up becoming more active internationally, we became more active nationally. Kwame, of course, came back annually for fundraisers and party events, but the fact of the matter is that there was little interaction between the two.
Well, you know, what Afia describes is a reflection of some of the political differences for those of us who continue on. And I know that there would be a counter description of what Afia said, but I was not close to that work. But what I do know from Gwen Patton, our dear sister, who kept the archives very well at that community college she went to, and she gave me a poster of Thea. It was a COINTELPRO FBI poster, which showed the Central Committee of SNCC as they were being sought and looked at by the COINTEL program of the FBI. And SNCC officially dissolved in 1973 at a meeting which Gwen Patton attended with many of the notables. And she told me that story about the official dissolution of SNCC. But SNCC is in our bones. And so the SNCC Legacy Project, which continues, and anybody can view that. My papers are at Duke University, and the SNCC Legacy Project is at Duke University. And so people can learn more about what we did back then and what we continue to do through the various projects like the CRM Vet website, which this recording will contribute to that website, Afia and Fanny, because I did contact Bruce to let him know that we were doing this today. So we will add this recording to the archives of SNCC vets. But yes, we do have some differences about what happened and how it happened, because Mukasa, to this very day, he's still very strong on the party. And I will call him because he's here in Georgia, he's in Atlanta, and I hope to see him in a few days because his birthday is actually tomorrow. Did you know that, Afia? Mukasa's birthday is tomorrow. So be sure to tell him happy birthday. And you know, he loves cash, so remember that. So thank you for letting me share that little tidbit about COINTELPRO and SNCC and the dissolution finally in '73 officially.
I would point out that while we may have had our differences, and in fact, we know that the federal government did not hesitate to use the differences that existed within the Black Panther Party, the Nation of Islam, as well as SNCC, to advance its own agenda. The question was what was the relationship between the party and SNCC, and the relationship between the party and SNCC was not a healthy one.
There's a comment in the chat, and Alan Haber has his hand up, and there's 5 minutes left before a hard stop. Let me read the comment. There are some Africans, those born in America, that do believe the current genocide in Gaza is not our fight. As already stated, since the 1960s, we have stood in solidarity with Palestine. Would you please speak to this lack of understanding by some folks in our community? Alan has his hand up.
Can I do that one? Can I do that one?
Why don't we get both of them, and then the three of us can respond?
Yeah,
Okay.
let Alan ask his question. You have 1 minute, Alan.
Well, I'm very glad to be here. I was more in the first generation of SNCC from the SDS, and I was the northern liaison, so to speak. So the beginning of SNCC, I knew everybody in the office, and my first trip to Atlanta to the south, I stopped at an intersection on the way to Auburn Street. I said, "Where is this Auburn Street?" And the person looked at me and raised his hand in a Nazi salute, said, "Heil Hitler," 3 blocks down and to the left. That was my introduction to Atlanta. But I did have a question. My understanding from people I knew who were in the Mississippi Project, that a lot of the stimulus to the Black Power was that the Black men in the SNCC project in Mississippi were distressingly attracted to the white women who were coming down from the north. And while it was nicely phrased that there were economic and social and class differences and so on that led to struck, I thought what I heard was that it was really a lot of resentment and hard feelings that the white people coming down were breaking up relationships and the solidarity in the Black community. And that's when it seemed, well, the white people just really, we have to do our own thing and the white people have to do their thing. And that seemed to me the emotional energy in the Black Power, because it was too disruptive in your own community. So I heard some of that reflected, and is that the case, or was this more a philosophical question?
It was a combination of the both. A part of it was that tension. However, if you will Google Vine City, Atlanta Project, SNCC, Black Power paper, there is a full discussion about the tensions between Blacks and white in the organization, and why and where our participation and contribution should be. I would also urge the reading of the book recently released, Stayed on Freedom. It's a biography done by Dan Berger of Gwen Zahara Simmons and Michael Simmons, who Michael Simmons, Gwen was a project director in Laurel, Mississippi, and Michael was one of the leaders of the anti-war campaign for SNCC and wound up spending 3 years in prison for his work. So, Alan, you touched on an aspect, but it wasn't purely that I don't jealousy, but what those relationships and that adoration uh, typified, as opposed to the commitment to the person for the most part, and the work that was at hand, and the priorities that were essential, especially in the early days that you're talking about, when it was life and death.
Afia, I would say that that description trivializes the significance of the call for Black political power. We were always clear on that question. That debate between Stokely Carmichael and Bayard Ruskin on the question of Black power is in my papers at Duke University. So if you Google Teresa Elamine papers, you will see that that debate in writing between Stokely and Bayard on the question of Black power. It was always about Black political power with clarity. And the white women who came from the North seemed to enjoy connecting with the Black men. James Foreman married to Dinky, and to this day, she has those beautiful children. And I look at them today, and they're just so wonderful. Shaka and the son, who's a lawyer in DC, and I'm forgetting his first name. But
James.
yes, there was a lot of integration in the movement, and it was really about love.
A lot of love, a lot of love.
Loved each other. But Black political power was what it was really about. And any differences about that were also played out in debates and discussion among Black men and women who disagreed in some ways around the question. But
I would simply add that the term, there was a term that was coined to label the phenomenon. It was called Freedom High.
Yes,
Freedom
High. Could I exercise the moderator's prerogative, because we cannot answer this question, which I think has to do with the future and is so important. And that is, there are some Africans born in America that do not believe the current genocide in Gaza is not I assume that means is not our fight. Right. As already stated, since the 1960s, we have stood in solidarity with Palestine. Would you please speak to this lack of understanding by some folks in our community? May I respond to that, and then others can respond? I want to say specifically that, yes, in terms of the history, and certainly SNCC and other progressive people have stood with Palestine. Today, we are not standing with Palestine, we are standing with the world. We are standing with the world because indeed the United Nations said in 2000 that in 5 years, Gaza would not be inhabitable. That was before October 7th. This is an entire region of the world that is not going to be able to sustain itself. And if that region cannot sustain itself, the rest of us in the world are facing the same problem. We are standing in solidarity with humanity, trying to save the planet from nuclear destruction. Make no mistake, we continue to escalate this war in the Red Sea over commodities, and the commodities are far more important to the international capitalist market than the death of 30,000 civilians in this war. We have to focus on the future going forward. Let us learn from our mistakes, but let us try to unite to save not just Palestine, but to save the planet.
Exactly. Thank you.
Nelson Mandela said, none of us are free until the Palestinians are free. Because if anybody understands apartheid, it's the South Africans, which is why they came out and went to the International Court of Justice and charged genocide. Because we have to make the charge clear, because as Africans, we know what genocide looks like. We know what it means when they steal your land. We know what it means when Zionism, which is a racist ideology, is perpetrated on a people. And that's what we are fighting very clearly, politically. We are fighting Zionism, and we say free Palestine, free Palestine. Give them the land back. Stop the settlers. Give them the land back. Free Palestine. And Tara of the DMV branch of the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. Glad to see you, Tara. You got your hand up. What's up? What's up, Tara?
Wow. I have been waiting for this conversation for a very long time, and I'm relieved to see that it's recorded because unfortunately I had a meeting that went too long, and I'm just coming on the call right now. So I really apologize if you've already addressed this, but I just thought I can't imagine a better group of comrades and giants to pose this question to. So if there's time, I'd love to know, or if there's another, if you've already covered it, I will definitely go and find the recording. And I'm so excited to watch this conversation. But the question that I have is, I'm curious to know if and how you all ever addressed issues of sexual assault, especially sexual assault that was committed by fellow comrades. And so I'm curious to know, if you experienced this, if you have any lessons to share, and also any guidance you have about how women in movement can address this issue, because I'm sorry to say that it's rampant. I'm shocked because in my experience, it feels like I've experienced worse things amongst my own fellow ideological comrades. And it puts us in a really difficult position because we want to see the movement progress. So we want to see people who see themselves as leaders in the movement to be able to continue. But then at the same time, we know that if we stay silent or if we don't address the issue, then it's just going to keep getting worse and worse. And there will be more sisters who are, and siblings who are affected. So anything you have to share on this topic, I would love to know how you all handled this, because I can only imagine that it's, if anything, it's probably better, I guess, I don't know, as a woman right now to be in movement. I hope, but I don't know if that's the case. So I'm just curious to know what you all experienced and what you and how you address this issue.
Well, it is such a big question, but I was 17 and a virgin when I met the SNCC folks, and the rest I would not want to tell on this at this moment. So we should probably do another session probably a more closed session, Tara, since you asked the question, and maybe we can get some women together and talk about what it was like then, and maybe Athea remembers the Third World Women's Organization with Fran Bill and others, which I think attempted to address some of this inside of SNCC. Do I have that right, Athea?
Yes, you do. Yeah, I would simply add to that. I would remind, and I think that the comment that Kwame made,
Yes.
for which he became infamous, and that is that the only position for a woman in the movement was prone, was indicative, even though SNCC was beyond the other civil rights and organizations in the roles that women played in the organization. It was still sexism or male supremacy and patriarchy was still a problem, and it was not addressed healthfully, and gave rise to the Third World Women's Conference. And I would urge that we would include Fran in a future discussion.
Yes. Hopefully she would be able to do that. We'll try to organize something in March. It would be great to have Fran as a part of it, and probably Gwen too, Zahara, if we could get her. So maybe we'll try for that. Let's talk about that, Athea.
Great question. Thank you.
Well, we should probably end, and thanks so much to all my sisters and my brother Alan and Will for showing up, because it's a whole bunch of women from the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, and a branch is starting in Chicago, Dr. Fanny Rushing, so I hope you will join. The event is next week on the 24th, and Gloria McMillan is here, who's a part of that organizing effort. So I hope you will join, Dr. Fanny. And so we'll get back with you on that, because I know you have a major event going next Saturday on the 24th, but many of us will be at the founding relaunch of the Chicago branch of the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. So I think we're ready to start the Fannie Lou Hamer song, and everybody save the chat, save the chat. Thank you.